In dimensioning the safety key, there are a few dimensioning rules that come to light in this one, and that's what's known as stacking dimensions. Smaller dimensions need to be inside of larger dimensions. We do have a hole here. Holes are always dimensioned in diameter, or a complete circle, and we have an angle measurement. Measuring interior angles on the part is common practice, so keep that in mind. I already have the overall length, width, and height, and actually in fairly good position. Probably the only change I would even consider is putting this 190 overall height maybe on this front view. And I'm just going to do it. Free up a little space on the opposing side. I'm going to start with the hole placement. There are at least three dimensions for every hole. Horizontal placement, as well as vertical placement. I know one of our dimensioning rules is not to dimension on the object. And in this case, dimensioning this 0.56 on the object would be your better option. One, I can't take this dimension in the top view at all. And in the right side, I'd be dimensioning to a hidden center line, which is a process we don't want to do either. Being on the object, instead of placing this dimension out here, eliminates long extension lines and the extension lines crossing through multiple object lines. And the same would hold true if we brought the dimension to this side. We have extremely long extension lines. We're going through multiple object lines. Dimensioning this on the part is the best option. In terms of stacking, our dimension lines and extension lines, we want to avoid crossing. I can't move this one. It's small enough. There we go. So this would be bad practice, where these extension lines and dimension lines cross. This may be multiple step process. As I move this dimension, I may now need to change the placement of this dimension or vice versa, depending on where I go to place these. So I have a proper stack here, the smaller dimensions inside the larger dimension, and this will happen again. I do need a diameter dimension, not radius. Leader line pointing to the center of the circle. Diameter symbol automatically comes in. As I go to take more dimensions, it may affect where I place a dimension. If I were to take this 0.76 dimension, my arrowheads are now interfering with the diameter dimension, which I now need to adjust its placement. So that is a possibility. Well, then when I go to cut this little step down in here, I now have dimension lines crossing. And this is a feature that we want to try to avoid. And this one is pretty easy to avoid. And probably the easiest change is to take this 0.76 dimension and dimension it here in the top view. This is not the worst thing possible. But as I start to add dimensions to these more complicated parts, I may need to change where I place a given dimension. In terms of stacking, I can get away with not stacking here. That way I can place these half-inch dimensions on the top view. It would be possible to stack these dimensions here in the top view, but if we could avoid it, it would be the best practice to avoid it. So a situation like this, if I was going to measure this 0.7, I would stack them in this orientation. But since I was able to dimension this in the right side view, that eliminates the need for the stacking of dimensions. I do need a depth of cut at 0.4, and I need a depth of cut of 0.4 here as well. making sure that I have a gap between my object lines and my extension lines. I do need a width. And I think, no, I have one more. I need this 0.12 dimension, and this could be taken here or here. Just don't double dimension. I need the height of the base material. So in terms of placing these dimensions, when I take this dimension, I now have to adjust the placement of this one to form the stack. Lastly, I have an angle dimension. An angle is 60 degrees, dimensioning on the object. It's common practice. Since we are using that smaller font size of 0.125 or 1/8 of an inch, placement between the arrowheads should come quite readily. We do only need 2 decimal places for this one, but if that is something that you need to change, it is under Dimension Style, and you will modify Dimension Style in terms of text size. Arrowhead size needs to match, and the fact that we only need 2 decimal places. If you are making this change, it will automatically update throughout the entire drawing. Dimensioning the safety key.